The 2nd Battalion of the Bedfordshire Regiment was a regular army unit whose role, like the 1st Battalion, was to provide security across the British Empire. In 1858, any line regiments up to the 25th Foot which did not already have a 2nd Battalion were authorised to raise one, following the British Army's shortcomings shown by the Crimean War and the Indian Mutinies. The 16th Regiment of Foot, later the Bedfordshire Regiment, was among them. The 1st Battalion provided a large draft on which to build the new battalion, which was raised in Ireland and remained there until 1861. In the 56 years before the Great War, the battalion spent its overseas life in Canada, the West Indies, India, Burma, Gibraltar and South Africa, where it would gain its first battle honour for the regiment. When the British Empire joined the Great War in August 1914, the battalion was stationed in South Africa and was shipped back to Europe. After a short stopover in the New Forest area, where they were refitted for European service and took on reinforcements to bring them up to an operational strength of over 1,000 men, they landed at Zeebrugge on the 6th of October 1914. The 2nd Bedfordshires spent the first 14 months of the war within the 21st Infantry Brigade 7th Infantry Division, along with the 2nd Battalion of the Yorkshire Regiment, the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Scots Fusiliers, and the 2nd Battalion of the Wiltshire Regiment. The battalion was immediately heavily engaged during the First Battle of Ypres, which saw 2 commanding officers killed in quick succession during hand-to-hand fighting, and the battalion reduced to the size of a company. In March 1915 they were engaged at the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle, which saw another commanding officer among their heavy losses, and Captain Foss win the Victoria Cross. May saw them lose their 4th commanding officer during the Battle of Festubert, and the following month they were engaged again at the second action at Givenchy. To round their busy first 12 months off, their 5th commanding officer was among the hundreds lost at the Battle of Loos in September 1915. A reorganisation of the British Expeditionary Force on the Western Front in December 1915 saw their brigade move to the 30th Division and the brigade's battalions spread amongst the new and inexperienced brigades. The 2nd Bedfordshires moved into the 89th Brigade and served alongside the 17th, 19th and 20th Battalions of the King's Liverpool Regiment for the next 27 months of the war. The Battle of the Somme 1916 saw their division one of only 2 divisions to take and hold their objectives during that terrible, infamous opening day, the 1st of July. 10 days later they assaulted the notorious Trones Wood position, losing several hundred men in the process, and at the end of the month they took almost 200 more casualties during the Battle of Delville Wood. After 2 months rebuilding, the division were rotated back to the Somme, the 2nd Bedfordshires being among the assaulting battalions in the Battle of Le Transloy, when they lost a further 250 men. March 1917 saw the battalion engaged in operations pressing the German forces back to the Hindenburg Line defences, and the following month they were among the first assaulting waves in the Battle of Arras, taking all of their objectives for a surprisingly small casualty list. The 3rd Battle of Ypres that autumn saw them engaged in July and August, although the division were largely spared from involvement in much of the later phases and had a relatively quiet winter. After years of heavy losses and not enough men to fill the gaps in the ranks, the British Army was greatly reduced in February 1918. Part of this saw the traditional 4 battalions per brigade reduced to 3, and the 2nd Bedfordshires were transferred into the 90th Brigade, still within the 30th Division, serving alongside the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Scots Fusiliers and the 16th Battalion of the Manchester Regiment. From the opening day of the German Spring Offensive, the 21st of March 1918, they were heavily engaged throughout Operation Michael and could only muster a small company after over a week of battle. The now tiny division was moved to a quiet part of the line around Ypres to rest and rebuild, but inside a month the survivors ironically found themselves right in the way of the next phase of the German offensive juggernaut, the Battle of the Lys. At the end of May 1918, the 7th Bedfordshires were among the long list of battalions disbanded following the heavy losses during the German Spring Offensives and the resulting reduction to the size and structure of the British Army. The 7th Bedfordshires were folded into the 2nd Bedfordshires, who took their place in the 54th Brigade of the 18th Eastern Division. Within this brigade, the 2nd Bedfordshires fought alongside the 6th Battalion of the Northamptonshire Regiment and the 11th Battalion of the Royal Fusiliers. The resulting battalion found itself almost 700 strong, a number it had not enjoyed for several months. August 1918 saw the start of the 100 Days Offensives that ultimately led to the end of hostilities in November 1918. During these operations, the 2nd Bedfordshires were heavily engaged again during the battles of Amiens and Albert in August, followed by the 2nd Battle of Bapaume and the Battle of the Hindenburg Line in September. The final advance in Picardy saw them engaged during the Battle of the Selle in October and the Battle of the Sambre just days before the armistice was signed in November. In the final days of the war they were billeted at Le Cateau, where the 1st Bedfordshires had fought in August 1914. The remainder of their Great War service was spent in billets around the area until the battalion was demobilised and reformed back in Britain. That July, the purely territorial force Hertfordshire Regiment was merged into the Bedfordshires to form the Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire Regiment. After refitting, the 2nd Battalion of the Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire Regiment returned to their 19 years grand tour of overseas garrison duties, being posted to India, then Iraq in 1925, with a brief stop in Pakistan on their way back to Britain in 1926. During the Great War, the battalion earned a reputation as a solid, reliable unit, and many hundreds of gallantry medals were issued to men of the 2nd Bedfordshires, including Captain Charles Foss's Victoria Cross. But around 1,540 officers and men died while serving in the battalion.